Does conditioning some portion of U.S. military aid bring them?
Yeah, I think, Joe, it seems that the Israeli government is listening to our government on a few things. They haven't struck at Iranian oil facilities or nuclear facilities, I should say, yet, because we don't know. They might still do that, but it appears from the reporting that they might not do that. So that means they're listening to us on that score. But they're not listening to us, as you just described in the conversation before, in the segment before, when it comes to how they're fighting in Gaza. And that is a problem. So if you're the U.S. president, you should condition, or you should at least threaten to condition military assistance. Presidents have done that before. It's not a new thing. So I would say that if I were in the White House, I would at least do it, privately, if not publicly.
So when we talk about American influence here, or at least, or more specifically, the influence of the Biden administration, seeing reports here that a response to Iran has essentially been crafted, and it includes targeting Iran military sites, not oil or nuclear. Are Joe Biden's fingerprints on that plan?
Yes, I would say so, because he very clearly signaled publicly that Israel should not strike nuclear facilities and also should not strike oil facilities. I believe the G7 joined him in both of those kind of declarations. And it looks like the Israeli government heard us loud and clear, which is, of course, helpful. But across the board, Israel isn't listening to everything. And part of it has to do with the right-wing government in power right now in Israel. And this right-wing government would like to fight in Gaza, frankly, so that Israel can reoccupy it.
Yeah, I want to, before we move on to some other geopolitical issues here, Evelyn, I want to bring us back to Donald Trump's interview yesterday on Bloomberg. How are you feeling about the response time for Israel and Iran? How long is this window going to be open?
Well, my guess is anyone's, I guess, which is to say that we don't know exactly how long it's going to take. But it is possible that Israel will wait until after our elections, wait to see who is going to be the next president. Because if I were the Israeli government and I had the luxury of waiting just a few weeks in order to see that end result, I would, unless I thought that there would be somehow a situation where I wouldn't have as much freedom of action. But I think in this case, given the two candidates, and given the fact that Donald Trump is likely to give more leeway to Israel, but also sometimes unpredictable, I would wait if I were Netanyahu. So I'm expecting them to wait till after November 5th.
Interesting. Of course, you do wonder the extent to which the election plays into this. Donald Trump was asked yesterday in his interview with John Micklethwait, our editor-in-chief at Bloomberg, about his feelings on various world leaders. This was in partnership with the Economic Club of Chicago. We'll bring you back to yesterday, Evelyn. Let's listen.
Okay. Russia has never had a president that they respect so much. I said to Angela Merkel when she was there, she's not there anymore, I wonder why. If I'm friendly with people, if I have a relationship with people, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, in terms of a country. I had a very good relationship with President Xi, and a very good relationship with Putin, and a very good relationship with Kim Jong-un, who has a nuclear force that you won't even believe.
Evelyn, I know you're deeply connected to diplomatic circles as well as defense circles. Does Donald Trump have a point? Do these relationships actually help secure America?
No. I mean, I think, yes, you want to be able to pick up the phone and talk to world leaders. You want them to respect you. But at the end of the day, we're not looking for friendship from these autocrats. Let's not forget that all of the nations you just listed, or he listed in that clip, China, North Korea, Russia, these are countries that are working counter to U.S. national security interests. So Donald Trump, in saying that President Trump, in saying that he wants to be friends with these people, is missing the point. His job is to advocate and to get the best possible outcome for the U.S. from the national security perspective, which means, frankly, standing up to those autocrats, standing up to them and denying them what they want. But we know time and time again, he's been unwilling to do that, certainly when it comes to Russia, at least rhetorically, and sometimes also when it comes to real life decisions. And with China, it's an uneven playing field there, uneven record. It's hard to say exactly how he'll come out on China, because sometimes he is tough on China, but across the board, it doesn't look like he has the appetite to counter China and really to stand up for the interests of our allies. Because the other part of this is that the United States leads alliances, and we derive a lot of strength from these alliances: economic strength, political strength, military strength. So we're not going to leave Japan hanging if China is challenging Japan, for example. So he also made a point. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to ask you, while in the moment that we have left, Evelyn, about Kamala Harris. Does she have the relationships that could help to manage a geopolitical crisis, or is it an advantage that she does not?
I think it's neutral. Clearly, she has some relationships. She's met with President Zelensky, so she has an ability to talk with these folks. She has a familiarity with them. She's met with Xi, I think, also several times. So that is helpful. I mean, not starting from zero. But again, the idea is not to create friendships. It's to create conversations, to create a certain amount of trust so that they know when you are discussing things with them that your word is good, whether you're threatening them or offering them some sort of a sweetener. So in negotiating with foreign countries, you want to have the ability to speak to them, to have them pick up the phone, but you're not trying to be friends with them. You want to have credibility. You want to have legitimacy. So I think she will have to develop some more of these relationships, but she has ones already with some of these players.